In this session, I'm going to have a look at the preliminary discussion on your Network Architecture B, Part 2. Looking at the document that says Part 2 now, let's have a look. End of Part 1, Part 2, Practical Implementation of BTG Network as per POE Task 1 Design. This part has 4 activities. At the end of this part, you should be able to implement and design using the network blueprints from Part 1 as an implementation guide. So in Part 1, we basically set up the IP addresses that's going to be used, and we drew 3 diagrams on the design of this network. The configurations in this part can get complex. Ideally, your lecturer will explain and guide you through the process. However, as part of discovery learning, you are expected to do some of the research and configurations, and YouTube is a good resource for many of the configurations here. In other words, they are saying, if I need to configure something practically in my server, there's many YouTube demonstrations on how to accomplish that task that will give you some guidance. Activity 1, to install and configure Windows Server 2016 routing, Active Directory installation configuration, which you are familiar with already. You've done it for NTAD. DHCP implementation and configuration, you've done it for NTAD as well. So it's a duplication. Windows 10 client domain is from your first year. Network architecture A. So let's look at now the first activity, which is new to us. Install and configure Windows Server 2016 virtual machines to be used for the BTG Active Directory Forest. They say we need to install 2 virtual computers, and they give us the names: BTG PTA DC01, BTG PTA DC01. This is wrong here. This one should be what? Yes, BTG JHB DC01. Since, yeah, they got it right the second time. Just the table is wrong there. Since BTG PTA DC01 and BTG DC JHB01 on different subnets, you will need to simulate routing functionality for the 2 servers to communicate. This can be achieved by adding static routes to the Windows Server routing tables, or by enabling routing and remote access on both servers. So this is new to us, and it's very interesting now because physically we're going to be actually configuring the routing. We've learned about routing previously, but we haven't configured it. In other words, we haven't implemented it on a virtual environment. Important for lecturers and students, your Hyper-V environment will need to be configured with 3 virtual switches, 1 to simulate the WAN and 2 to simulate the LAN as below. So we've got an internal only WAN, and then we've got LANs. How to do this? We will go into the virtual computer. Where's my virtual computer? It's here. I'm busy installing a second server. So I want to minimize that maybe. Yes. I'm going to open up my saved server computer here. No, I don't need to open up the server computer. I just need the virtual Hyper-V Manager. So I go into Hyper-V Manager. And in Hyper-V Manager now, I need to look at my switch configuration. On the right-hand side here, I can see there's my virtual switch manager. I click on the virtual switch manager, and currently I can see I've got internal switch, 2 internal switches here. So according to the configuration, they wanted me to create, what did they want me to create? JHB PTA SDN WAN. So this is the JHB, okay, a WAN, which is wide area network, which means internet connection. and then private networks for the individual LANs. So let me go and create this now. I can go into my virtual computer. And in my virtual computer, I'm going to say I need to create a, they said it was private. Was it private? Yes, okay. So private, so I click on private, and then I say create virtual switch. Now, the private virtual switch was PTA JHB SDN, or I'm just going to say PTN, no, PTA, JHB, and I'm going to say WAN. You can get the names correct, right? So it's a private network, and I say, okay. So there I've got this switch that has been created. So I go back into my virtual switch manager, and then I go ahead and create the other virtual switches, which they said was internal. So I need an internal switch for PTA. PTA LAN internal. Is it private, they said? Is internal. Let's go and have a look again. So this one is internal and these are private. Okay. Internal is the first one and these are private. PTA LAN and JHB LAN are privates. I can go and change it. So if I make a mistake, I can always go, they said this one is internal. Private, sorry. Okay. Now, if I make a mistake, how do I go and correct it? I go back into the virtual switch manager. I click on the switch that I want to change, this one here, and I want to change it to internal. So I can click on internal and I can say apply. Can you see now? It's got PTA internal, and then there's the private one. And I need to create another one. So I'm going to say virtual switches, new virtual switch, and this one needs to be private as well. Private, create virtual switch. What is this one? I've got PTA, I need JHB. So I'll say JHB LAN. Apply. And I can see now there I've got PTA JHB WAN, and I've got the other two switches that I've created. So I've completed that part. Let me go back and see what's required next. Your Hyper-V server machines will have to be configured with two network adapters. One connecting to the WAN to simulate a WAN connection, to be assigned a public IP address for communication between Pretoria and JHB, another connected to the private IP address. I go back here now and I look at I'm going to close this one. So I've got a server that I've got saved here, and then I'm installing a network architecture server now. So for the first server here, I'm going to look at its settings. And I can see under network adapter, it's currently got one network adapter. And this one is connected to the internal switch. So I need to now add a network adapter. So I go to add hardware on the top. I click on network adapter. It's not allowing me to add because my machine is in a saved state. So I'm going to turn it off. Does it allow me to turn it off here? Saved. Start. You have to start it first. So it's running, it started, and then now it allows me to turn it off. So now it's turned off. So now if I go to the settings, and if I go to add hardware, and I see network adapter, it's allowing me to add. So make sure that your machine is turned off, so that if it's grayed out, then you know you need to go back and turn it off. So I go and I say add network adapter, and I can see now I've got two network adapters here. So it says that one of the network adapters will be needed to be will need to connect to the WAN, and the other network adapter will need to connect to the LAN. Can you see? Okay, so I've created the switches first, then I went into the server's settings and I said network adapter 1 must be connected to this switch, which was the WAN switch, and I said network adapter 2 must be connected to the LAN switch. And I can say apply and OK. So that has been configured now. Then, so we've done this part now. You will need to go into the server and then set an IP address for the different network cards. One network card will have a private IP address, and the next network card will have a public network address. So, oh, we're almost at the end of this one. Okay. So if I go back into my server, and if I turn this one on now, and I connect to it, this was the one that I was using for NTAT. I'm installing another one now. So you can basically go and change the configurations. The only problem you'll encounter is when you need to work with different domains. So you will need different domains. This one has a different domain compared to your college domain. So if it does not give us space problems, then we can create multiple servers. So I'll test it. You might have tested it as well. Has anyone encountered any space problems so far? Yes, no, yes. How many servers have you installed? But when you created, how many servers did you get to? 3, and it gave you errors. Okay, so the strategy can be that we can complete the activities using the, we do one module at a time, and then you delete afterwards if it's going to cause problems. So we need to look at exactly what is required, because once you've taken your screenshots, then the rest of it is just writing it up and doing the theory. So you can do the practical, take the relevant screenshots, and then save your screenshots in your relevant documents, and then go back and then say, okay, I can write it up thereafter. Action, Control-Alt-Delete. I can go now into my network and sharing center. And I can see I've got Ethernet and Ethernet 2. There's my two network cards that I've just installed. So for Ethernet, I can, this one was the first one we connected was to the WAN, which needs a public IP address, and then to the LAN, which needs a private IP address. And it must be number 2 in the servers. So in the case, in part 1, you determine for the servers OU, what are their IP addresses, the start and finish range of their IP addresses. Remember when we did the subnetting? So you'll go back and you look for the correct addresses. I'm just going to illustrate how to do that and what is required. So for the first one, now you can rename this according to the switches that you have. So you'll call it WAN and you'll call it LAN. Then you know which one is connected to which one. I can go and rename this. Okay, so I'm looking for I'm looking for IP version 4 properties. This one is been set to 192.168.10.1. Now, if this is a WAN, you need to have a public IP address. In other words, it can't be a private IP address. So a public IP address will not be in the range of 10 or 172 or 192. It will be an IP address that you choose that's a public one that you got from your internet service provider. So for illustration or demonstration purposes, I'm going to use an IP address that I got from my internet service provider, and let's say they gave me an address of 135. So is this an example of a public IP address? Yes, no. It's not starting with 10. It's not starting with 172. It's not starting with 192.168. So this is an example of a public IP address. So I can choose a public IP address like this, and then my default gateway will have to configure all of these according to how we have set it up so that we can get them both to communicate. So your default gateway is the address of the router. If your server is the router itself, then here it will be also the exact same IP address, 135.20.10.162. Because it's the address, your server is acting as the router. And this one is called the loopback address. That means it's also the name of your server. So whether you type 135.20.10.162 or you type 127.0.0.1, it means it's this computer. That's what it means. So this is an example of a public IP address that I would set for my WAN. and then I would go and I would look at the properties for the LAN, and then I would set it according to the case study. So according to the case study, maybe the IP address was 192.168.10.80. So you look at your IP addresses that you have got, okay, and then this one would be the address of the server. So it will default to 127.0.0.1. Now, look at the table. I just typed in an arbitrary number here. You look at your table, and according to your table, you've got servers' IP addresses. The second IP address from that table, you put it in here. So now we have set DNS cannot be left empty. So I'm going to put it as the server's address, 192.168.10.80. Okay, so I've configured that now. Let's go back and look at the question. Server successfully configured and named correctly. 4 marks. In other words, you need to show that you have changed the computer names. Even if you go back, let's say we're working with limited servers, you can go back and change the computer name temporarily without changing the name, just to take the screenshot. Can you see? So in my case, I can go back, whatever my server is called, I can go and name it correctly, take the screenshot, and then I've got my screenshot. Configured and named correctly. Server LAN IP address assigned according to the IP address plan. Your WAN IP address is assigned according to the public. Simulated. In other words, you made it up. I just made up a public IP address. Routing between the two servers successfully configured. 2 servers can successfully communicate. So we haven't done this part of it yet. Routing between the 2 servers successfully configured. I don't have 2 servers yet, but we will do a future demo. 2 servers that can successfully communicate. So they want us to set up routing and remote access. They said we can do this here. You can set a static IP address on the routing table, or you can set up routing and remote access on both servers. So that's how we're going to get the 2 servers to communicate. So what are they talking about here? So if I go into my server, I can go and install routing and remote access. So where would I go? Server manager. And I want to add a new role and feature. What do I want to add? Routing and remote access. So I'm going onto the server and I'm looking for remote access. Remote access provides seamless connectivity to direct access, VPN, web application, direct access, always on, remote access, etc. Is it remote access? Let me see. Network policy. Yeah, there's it here. Remote access and routing can be deployed as a single tenant or multiple tenants. So remote access. So what am I looking for here? I'm looking for routing. So it selects the minimum features. Do I need anything else? No. So I'm going to say restart if required. Let's just look at progress on my This is my second server that I installed just now. So for the second server, I also need to go and connect an additional network card. So let me go into my Hyper-V manager. There's my second server. I'm going to go to settings. I want to add, oh, it does allow me to add a network adapter. So I'm going to add a network adapter. Settings. So I've got one network adapter. And so one network adapter needs to be connected to Joburg LAN, and the next one needs to be connected to the WAN. So I've configured my second server now to be connected as well. So there's my second server. And now on this server, I'm configuring routing and remote access, this one here. So let me just go and have a look at this one. It's still busy configuring or installing. So for the first question, we are familiar with how to do this one, and this one. Routing is the one that we are attempting to configure now, and then to prove that the two servers are communicating successfully. That's the last two parts that we need to complete. So once it's still busy installing in the background, but it's put in my console. Once it's installed, you'll come up into this routing and remote access wizard. So you can see the server is still busy being installed. So it says configure and enable routing and remote access. I will go through this wizard. And what are we configuring here? We're configuring it not as any of these. We are configuring it as custom configuration. Secure connection between two private networks. Connect this to a remote network, such as a branch office. We can do this one. Do you want to use demand dial connections to access the remote networks? Yes. How do you want the IP addresses to be assigned to remote clients, automatically or from a range of IP addresses? So if you've got DHCP, you can say automatically, and then finish. And then it asks us to configure demand dialing. In the case study, did they say demand dial between the two offices? So if this is the server I'm connecting to, I needed to set the IP addresses. So I would need to set the IP addresses and then use this configuration. So you'll need to know or have written down what is the IP addresses that you have assigned on both of the on both of the Johannesburg and of the Pretoria servers. Then I didn't remember, or I haven't configured my IP addresses here. So you'll need to go and configure both of them. But this is the interface that you would use now to configure routing and remote access. And then once it's configured correctly, You will then need to prove that your two servers are communicating with each other. In other words, you can connect them. So let's just go back and have a look between the remote offices. The question was, how are the two computers two offices connected to each other? So you needed to configure internet and VPN access. So you have a choice here. You can create it, you can configure it as a demand dial link, or you can create it as a VPN. So in routing and remote access, you can configure one of the two. We'll stop the demo there for this session.